So in the last movie, we created this simple 3D scene using Three.js. We just have this blue cube that's rotating around. Now you'll notice that it's really flat, and that's because we don't have any lights that have been added to the scene yet, and we're just using a basic shader. So let's make some changes to make this more of an interesting 3D scene. So the first thing I'm going to do is to change the material that I'm using. And actually, if we jump back to the documentation, if we scroll down here, we can see all of the different materials that I have available, and these will create a whole host of different effects. But the one that I'm going to use is called a Lambert shader. So I'm going to change this from Mesh Basic Material to Mesh Lambert Material. And if you've done 3D work before, you'll notice the Lambert shader. It's a very common one. It's got kind of a nice diffuse effect to it. Now I'm going to keep the color the same. The next thing I need to do is to actually add a light to the scene. And that's really going to show off the differences in these materials. So I'm going to come under here and I'm going to create a new variable and I'm going to call it point light. And obviously we're going to be creating a point light here. So this is going to be equal to new 3.pointLight. And to this, we're simply going to give a color for the light, or we're just going to make it white. So now we've created the point light. Now we need to position it in the scene. And a point light, you can think of kind of like a general purpose light, kind of like a light bulb. So what I'm going to do is to position that. So point light, and we're going to set its position property .x is equal to 10. And we're going to set its y property equal to 50. And we'll set its z property equal to 1000. Much like other objects in the 3D scene, I actually need to add it to my scene. So I'm going to say scene.add point light. So now if we go over and refresh our example, now you can see a much more realistic type 3D shading going on, where we have a nice kind of diffuse material, and you can see that light is affecting it to give it kind of a real world type of feel to it. So now if I change the actual light here, we can try a different light. Let's try a directional light, and I'll just call this D light. And we're going to instead create a directional light here. We're going to keep the color of that light white. And we're going to set a couple of properties here. So we're going to set dLight.position. And we can use a set method rather than setting each of the individual ones separately, which is just a shorthand way of doing it. I'm going to set it at 0, 1, and 0, and then add that dLight to the scene. Now this is essentially going to be a directional light which is pointing from the top down in my scene. So now you can see the light is coming directly from above onto my cube, and you can see how that shows up. So again, when you're working with Three.js, you have a huge variety of options to create all types of different effects. Again, going through the different materials will give you all types of realistic effects, from like shininess, like diffuse, rubber, all these different materials that you can recreate using these materials. And then obviously lighting plays a huge role in 3D to give the right effects to your scene. So that's the basics of using Three.js. Definitely, it is the premier framework for working with WebGL, and it's definitely the one that I recommend.